Good morning and welcome to another Seize the Day. I trust that you guys had a good night's sleep, waking up ready to seize this new day. Today is Wednesday, January the 10th, and we're already almost a week and a half into this new year. For those of living on the East Coast here, we got slammed with some pretty good snow. Yesterday was a little dreary. Today has been during the night. It's been raining, so most of the snow on the walkways and stuff is gone. It's amazing. You can go from having around 16 inches of snow to looking outside and looking at the street and seeing hardly any. So it's just the power of weather, right? But I trust you guys are ready to begin a new day. Sorry about yesterday. It seems there was some malfunction with the Facebook in particular, but I hope that circumstance is working out for you this morning. We are now in a series that we've been calling "This Is Life," and this whole series is going to take us through a look at various passages that seem to help us to define what this life, and its pursuits should be all about. We're allowing Jesus to come and to bring some good counsel into our life, so that we might live it abundantly, like He promised. This study is going to begin to focus on some of the things that Jesus is saying that we have to be careful about as we begin to evaluate life and its meaning, right? Trying to bring some definition to it. As we do that, then we're going to take this series into a path that will begin to look at elements that will help to fortify this life, to make it even stronger, right? And more robust. Thought it would be a great thing to do during this season of the year. Now that we're just beginning a new year, people are having all kinds of resolutions, and we thought it would be a good moment for us to just evaluate one's life, making sure we're on this good path, right? So we're beginning by taking a look at Luke chapter 12, and we'll be in this chapter for a couple of weeks. There's a lot of really good things in this chapter for us to consider. So if you would, why don't you turn to Luke chapter 12, and I'm going to just reiterate some of the things that I shared yesterday, and then we'll move a little bit forward. We are in a point in our story where Jesus is telling the crowds that have assembled, and in particular, a gentleman who had asked him a question, if he asked Jesus if he would be the arbiter between he and his brother in the dividing of their inheritance. And Jesus's response is, that why would you ask me to do that? He goes on. He says, "Who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" And then he said to them, so it's not just this man, it's to those in the crowd. So you get a sense that what Jesus is about to share has importance for all those within earshot. And he begins by saying, watch out. He says, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. And so here Jesus gives this warning, and perhaps it would be safe to conclude that greed might have been one of those presenting issues for this gentleman asking Jesus to be this judge between he and his brother regarding the inheritance. And he offers this wisdom. Again, perhaps this man was projecting how much better his life would be if he only had more. So the driving force to get Jesus to be this mitigator could have been that he's hoping that he would get more, and therefore his life would be, so much more enriched. And perhaps he was making ends meet was a challenge, or maybe his lifestyle that he chose had created some real pressure for this gentleman, where he thought the solution would be more money. And so when Jesus says a man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions, he's giving us wisdom on what should be our relationship then to the things that we possess. We have to be careful that we don't use them as a judge as to whether or not we've arrived, right? Or this defines me. It's got to go beyond that. One of the things that is interesting, there are a number of proverbs that I think are fitting here. In Proverbs chapter 18 and verse 11, Proverbs 18:11, it says, "The wealth of the rich is their fortified city. They imagine it an unscalable wall." Right? So think about it. Like, the wealth of the rich is like a fortified city. They imagine it an unscalable wall. In other words, it brings this level of comfort and security, right? We think it's impenetrable. The concerns of this world will never breach these, this safety wall that I put around myself. And we all know that that's not true, right? That's why you read Proverbs 23:5 and put these two together now. Proverbs chapter 23, verse 5 says, "Cast but a glance at riches, and they are gone, for they will surely sprout wings and fly off to the sky like an eagle." So how is our wealth like a wall city, like an unscalable wall, when in a moment they could be gone? They could just fly away. And it makes it, a little more unstable, doesn't it? So what does Jesus do? Jesus then now begins to share this story, and in this story, there are many really good lessons for us. So listen to the story. He says, "The ground of a rich man produced a good crop. And he thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." And we looked at this, right? Man's rich, he's wealthy. And now he's even asking himself a really good question. What am I going to do? And so at this point in the story, who doesn't want to be like this guy? I mean, good problem to have, right? He's wealthy, and now he's even more wealthy. And his biggest concern, it seems here now, is like, hey, I don't have enough room to store, all my crops. And so this is where the storyline here now begins to make a little shift, because then the conclusion that he draws is filled with all kinds of assumptions. Notice what it says in verse 18 and 19 of Luke chapter 12. Jesus goes on and says, this is what the man said. "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." He makes a plan, as I said, based on some assumptions. And maybe when you're reading the story, it may not be that obvious to you, but the rich man is oblivious to the definitions that I think or these assumptions that he's holding dear. So what am I talking about? Well, assumption number one is that he thinks this is all for him, right? Notice his language. It's my crops, my barns, my grain, my goods. And he doesn't stop long enough to consider why he was rich. Why is he in this position? He thought the stuff was for him. And his plan for the future? Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. You know, it's like, hey, babe, you just won the lottery. And so the assumption is that it's all for him, right? That he's going to spend it all on himself. Then the other assumption is, or that he has control over everything for himself, right? And then he says here, the other assumption is that when he says, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. So the assumption is, I have a lot of stuff. I have the control over all this stuff. And I get to choose how I'm going to, what I'm going to do with it. And I'm going to have, and there's a long life that comes with it. So in his plan, he doesn't plan far enough out. What do I mean by that? Well, his strategic plan did not include the life that is to come. See, his long-range plan excluded eternity. His retirement goals didn't provide beyond the scope of this life. And isn't what our faith, isn't this, at the heart of what it is that we're believing? It's saying to you and me that there is this kingdom of heaven that Jesus has come to introduce. That the kingdom of God is now, the door has been thrown open because of the work that Jesus has accomplished on our behalf. The Son of God came into the world and began proclaiming what? Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Jesus began to speak of this world that is yet to come, of which he then speaks with great authority and provides this as a means of evaluating the life that we are currently living so that we may embrace this life of abundance, a life that is full. He says, in this kingdom, there will be no more sorrow, no more death, no more tears, right? No more sickness. Like, this is a world that now where all of creation is going to be reconciled to itself. And all of this is coming at a day when God will recreate what he has already created. Only all of the vestiges of sin will be removed. Who doesn't want to live in that world? I mean, we dream about that world. But do you think about that world as you are living in this life? And I'm not saying that that means that you're supposed to be so heavenly minded that you're no earthly good. I'm not saying that. But if you really understood the kingdom, God is saying, I want you to behave in this world based on the principles of this world that is yet to come. So I'm living my life now with a view towards eternity. I'm living my life now with the realization that one day I'm going to stand before a holy God and give an account for my life. So everything that I'm doing here now, I'm putting against this disclosure that Jesus has given me about heaven. And so my life now can't be circumscribed just by the amount of time that I spend in this world. If that was the case, then surely, just like this man said, hey, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, be merry. Why? Because tomorrow you're dead. And all this stuff is going to go, so you might as well enjoy it now. And if your view of life is that I pass in this world and it's over, that's it, eternal sleep, I'm done. Well, then, if that's your only hope, you may as well go out and get as much as you can. You should spend as much time experiencing what you can experience. But if the Gospels are true, if what Jesus is saying is true, then this world is really an opportunity for you and I to know him better and to live out this new life in a way that is demonstrating our allegiance to God, to his son, to this kingdom. So it means that my relationship with my stuff takes on a whole nother, relationship. My relationship with other people, it also takes on a whole nother perspective, because what we read in the Gospels, right, are things like this, where it says you ought to love your neighbor as yourself. Now, why would I do that unless I believe that one day I'm going to stand before God and give an account for the way in which I lived my life? Why would I give that any consideration? Why when you read through the scriptures and it says that blessed is the one who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice, for his life will be built on a solid rock. Like, why would I take that advice? Why would I really try to then listen to what Jesus is saying to me and then put them into practice? If I really don't believe that there is this life that is yet to come, if I really don't believe that this life that has begun in me because of the presence of God's Spirit in my life, because of what Jesus accomplished on the cross by removing my sins, then I'm very short-sighted. All I have is the days in which I'm living, and I'm just trying to get as much as I can and enjoy as much as I can while I have the time. And that's what it seems like this man is doing. He's made these two assumptions. One, that he has the control over all of his resources. And second, that he has this long life. And in the short run, it may appear that way. But listen to this. This is what Jesus says as he continues the story. In Luke chapter 12, verse 20, he says, "But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life is going to be demanded from you. And then who will get what you prepared for yourself?'" Like, what happened to the years to come? Right? Like when he says you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Well, he doesn't have many years. According to what Jesus is saying here, it says you're a fool for thinking that. Because you thought that you had all this time, but you don't. Because this very night, your life will be demanded from you. What about his control? Remember going back to that Proverbs in chapter 18, when it says, that for many, what did he say? It says, the wealth of the rich is their fortified city. They imagine it an unscalable wall. Like, hey, man, I'm protected. I'm living on Easy Street. Things are going great. But it says today, your life is going to be demanded of you. So what happened to those years to come? What happened to the eat, drink, and be merry part? Because he made this assumption, right, that I'm going to be able to control all my wealth for me, and I have a long life. But now Jesus is calling him a fool. Why? Because he didn't anticipate this eternity. He didn't recognize that there was a life after this life, that he would be accountable for the way in which he lived out this life. So in the end, who gets his stuff? Who gets everything that he stored up for himself? Who's going to inherit all those barns? The answer? Somebody else. And not because he's generous and giving it all away, but because he's dead. See, he thought it was all about him. And then Jesus then adds this really sober word at the end, right? He says, This is how it will be with anyone who stores up for things for himself, but is not rich towards God. Boy, that's that's an interesting, summation here, isn't it? This is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself, but is not rich towards God. God is going to call him into an account, and he's not going to be prepared. And all this trust that he had in his position, right, or in his possessions, they're not going to help him in that moment. The reality is, right, naked we come into this world, and naked we're leaving. You can't take it with you. People say that all the time, but when they say that, they say, okay, hey, you can't take it with you, so you better be busy spending it all now. You better be all about eat, drink, and be merry, because tomorrow you're dying. So let's go. Come on, enjoy it now. It's just the opposite emphasis that Jesus is saying here in Luke chapter 20. It says, your very life is going to be demanded from you today. And instead of storing up all these things for yourself, you should have been storing up treasures in heaven, right? You should have been rich towards God, which now all of a sudden puts very clearly where Jesus is going with this, because remember how this all started, a man asking Jesus to act as a judge, to tell his brother to share his inheritance. And it appears that the motivation there may have been greed, right? May have just been this desire for more stuff, because the story that Jesus tells is unfolding this. And it's not just this one man who has the problem. It affects us all. We can easily lose sight of what this life really is all about. Jesus is saying, I don't want you to live your life pointing to all these possessions that you have and then saying to yourself, this is life. Is it really? Because on a day when your life will be demanded, how about all those passages that says, what good does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his soul? What will he give in exchange for his soul? See, it's a much different picture when you begin to look at your life through this lens of eternity. And it's not that you then live your life with this angst, like, I have to do all this stuff so I earn my way into heaven. No, take a deep breath, because your entrance into this kingdom of heaven is not because of works, but it's because of grace. Your entrance into heaven is because God sent his son. And because of the sacrifice that he paid for you and for everyone who puts their hope in him, we are assured of this life to come. When you get to heaven, your only claim that will allow you to enter in is, I know Jesus, and Jesus knows me. But what's going to demonstrate that you really do know Jesus? See, this is where your life now, your works don't get you in. Your life is just a testimony to where your allegiance truly lies. And if you live this life with an awareness of God's will and God's purposes, if you live your life now like heeding the counsel that Jesus gives us, don't you see, it will be easily recognizable where you have placed your hope. And when that day comes, when you stand before your God, he's going to say, hey, I know you. You follow my son Jesus, don't you? And your whole life is going to be a testimony to that. Over against someone who is trying to establish their own little kingdom in this world when it is not within their control to number their days, or even determine how their goods are going to be, dispersed. That's why Jesus calls him a fool. You're banking on things that you have no power to really see through. So what does it mean then to be rich towards God? See, this is where now you and we have to think about passages like this one. I'm reminded of some really good counsel, and I'm going to read this text to you. It's found here in there's a passage in James that I think is really interesting, and I want you. This is all about a warning to those who are putting all their eggs in this basket. It's found in James chapter 5. So in James chapter 5, you look at verses 1 through 3. And he says this is James writing. He says, "Now listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that is coming upon you. Your wealth has rotted and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last days." And you see what it's hyperbolic language, right? But it's trying to wake us up to recognize that there is a shelf life to our stuff, that this wealth is not going to inherit the kingdom of heaven, that even the finest of clothes will decay, that the gold and silver, it's not entering the gates of the kingdom of heaven, and they will corrode in the same way your flesh. He says, because why? You've hoarded wealth in these last days. You'll become rich for yourself. You thought it was all about you. You thought you had, the command over how you were going to disperse all this. You thought it meant a long life. You were looking at it and saying, hey, this is life. Until the Lord comes and says, you fool. He says, you should have been rich in the things of God. So he, in verse 5 of chapter 5 in James, it says, you've lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened yourselves in the days of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered innocent men who were not opposing you. So there are some who can use their funds for good. And then there are some who just use it for themselves and for their own advancement. The blessings that God brings on our life should always drive us to understand where those blessings come from and the one to whom one day we will stand and give an account of one's life. What a powerful, powerful story that begins to underline for you and me what life is really all about. That life doesn't consist in the abundance of possessions. And yet, listen to every commercial that comes across on our television, every advertisement. It's, listen, if you don't get this, you're missing out. If you don't possess that, you're living half of a life. Hey, you need to be driving this car. You need to be wearing this clothes. You need to have this jewelry. Otherwise, you're just not really experiencing, all of what could be your life. And we pursue those things without really being rich towards God. And being rich towards God means that I am invested in what God thinks are the most important things. And what did Jesus say? To love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. These are truths that enable us to go out and seize the day. So thank you so much for joining me today on this Wednesday, January the 10th. And Lord willing, we'll spend some more time tomorrow. And I'll take you to various places in the scriptures that just underscore that man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions, so that we can spend the rest of our time thinking about ways in which we could be rich towards God. Amen. God bless you. And thanks so much for joining this morning.